Okay, so I was going to talk about the art of storytelling in Celtic communities. And the art of storytelling among the Celts is not that different from the art of storytelling among other people who have a classic tradition of doing so, an importance, community importance to storytelling. But of cultural traditions that have survived into the modern period, they're probably, at least in Europe, at least in the Western world, among the peoples that have taken storytelling the most seriously and that have perpetuated it in many communities as a sacred art, which was the original function of storytelling. And you still get a great deal of that in the work of the greatest storytellers that were still around in the 20th century in particular Celtic communities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and give you a sense of who the storytellers were, what they did when they were telling stories, what they were trying to do, what they meant to do, and what were the tools of their trade. That is, how did they articulate the stories to convey those meanings to their audience. I'll be drawing on particularly storytelling from the west of Ireland, storytelling from the west and north of Brittany, because these are the places where this kind of art flourished for the longest period and was really well recorded. And also to some extent also from the western islands of Scotland, although that was a dying art at the time when people were starting to take it down and take a serious interest in it. Storytelling in a Celtic community, of course anyone could tell stories, right? You heard a great story, you would just reproduce it because it was entertaining, because it got people's attention. But some members of the community were professional storytellers. You went to them when you wanted to hear a story well told. And the person who was doing the storytelling would be called either a scéalaí. A scéalaí simply means a storyteller. A scéal is a story in Irish. So a scéalaí is someone who knows how to tell a story well. That's all. That's the craft, the art that he has. Or he could also be called a seanachí. And nowadays, of course, in English-speaking Ireland, people often use the term seanachí to just mean anyone who can tell a story in an exciting, clever way, regardless of what kind of story it is. That's not at all what the term seanachí means in traditional Irish, that is among communities that speak Irish. A seanachí means someone who talks about old things. A seanachí is the memory of the community. A seanachí is someone who, on the one hand, knows recent events, like who in the community is related to whom, what kind of relationships existed between certain families in your community for many generations back, and this is the cause of certain conflicts, or this is the cause of certain alliances, or there are certain agreements that were made by certain families within recent history, and it's important for people to keep that in mind. So the seanachí is the one who knows about that, who can actually tell you the story of how it originally happened and why these agreements were made and why they should still be binding. So for that reason, the seanachí is very important, but simply as being the memory of the community, the person who knows everybody's business and is expected to, and is able to provide people with that information whenever it's needed. And usually that information is provided in the form of a story. You actually tell the story of, these two families have this feud because of some land dispute that they had 2 generations ago. And this is exactly the way it happened. And you will give the names of the characters, and you will act it out. You will actually say, who did what first, and why the sense of grievance got accentuated, and why it actually degenerated into a feud. And you'll make people understand it through your storytelling, through your ability to conjure up that past event. So then this will have an effect on the present community. The present community will say, okay, well, that was a very good reason for a feud, and that explains why this is going on, and there's no reason why it should not be going on. Or they would say, what a stupid reason for a feud, And that will then lay the grounds for negotiations and for actually ending this state of tension in the community, depending on how the story was told and the actual facts of the case as the Shanachi remembered it. So that's one function of the Shanachi and one function of storytelling, again, because the Shanachi does everything through stories. He'll explain genealogies, again, through stories, by telling you, who married when and what circumstances this happened in, and give you the context of each event so that it sticks in the memory, so that you remember, oh yes, you can see how it relates to other things. You can remember it in order, chronologically, because it makes sense, because you can see how certain events follow from other events, and how whatever you're talking about then fits into this larger picture. It makes it easier to visualize and understand. However, there's another aspect of storytelling, and this is where the shkeli can come in, who can just tell any story entertainingly. The Shanachi always is a shkeli. Shanachi is always someone who knows how to tell stories with art in a striking and expressive manner. And there are certain stories that belong to the community. They're not necessarily stories about anyone you know. They're not necessarily stories about ancestors you can actually point to, down the generations. But they're stories that belong to the community for their ritual importance, because they somehow fit into the life of the community. They have a mythological importance. They're part of the foundation myth of the community. And the Shanachi is the only one who knows these stories. Of course, his auditors, the people who listen to him, know the stories too, but they don't consider themselves competent to actually tell the stories in the right way. Now, in modern times, of course, the primary function of the storyteller is to entertain his audience. I mean, that was always his function. You don't tell stories unless they're entertaining, or people eventually fall asleep during the presentation. But nowadays, you can tell a story just because it's entertaining. You will go to a storyteller for that experience and no other. In a traditional Celtic community, storytelling, especially if it involved mythical stories, had a particular ritual function, and you couldn't, especially some of the great stories, the stories that were felt to have the deepest significance in the life of the community, couldn't be told just for entertainment's sake. They couldn't be just told at any time, in any occasion, just because you wanted to hear that story. The story had to be told at a particular time of year, at a particular time of the day. It had to take a certain amount of time in the telling, and all of those things had to be respected. The storytelling season was in the winter. The traditional season was starting in Samhain, and theoretically up to Beltane, that is the entire dark half of the year, but really the 3 winter months between Samhain and Imbolc, between Light and Brita. And this was considered to be the darkest time of the year, and it was the time that was associated with the sleep of the land, the renewal of the land, so that you could start another cycle of agriculture, of work, and sort of bringing new life to the community after this period of renewal. And it was the period in which you communed with the ancestors.